Hey guys, and welcome back to my channel. So I'm a little overdressed today. I'm going to my friend's pop-up after this. A pop-up in the service industry is when like a bartender and somebody who works in the food industry, it can be either or together, come together and make their own menu for a limited time, usually one night only. And my friend is partnering with a chef who used to work at 11 Madison Park and doing a whole pop-up today. So we are going to support our friend and I'm very, very excited for it. So that is why I'm a little dolled up. But I thought this would be a fun time to do my most atmospheric horror novels, or just horror novels that I love reading that give a lot of really well done spooky atmosphere. You really feel like you are right there. The setting of the story feels almost like its own character. And I love atmospheric novels. I recently did a video on my favorite haunted house stories, where I talked all about The Woman in Black by Susan Hill, and somebody commented that this was one of the most atmospheric novels that they had ever read. So that is actually what really inspired this list today. And The Woman in Black is actually going to be book one on this list. I'm just going to read the back really quickly. I've spoken about this very recently on my channel. But this is a 1980s novel, or I guess more like a novella, that is written very much in the style of like an 1800s Victorian Gothic. I think Susan Hill absolutely nails the atmosphere of this story, being out on this like island marsh in this old manor house. I absolutely adore this book, and because it inspired this whole list, I needed it to be my starting point. So it says, what real reader does not yearn somewhere in the recesses of his or her heart for a really literate first-class thriller? One that chills the body, but warms the soul with plot, perception, and language at once astute and vivid. In other words, a ghost story written by Jane Austen. Alas, we cannot give you Austen, but Susan Hill's remarkable Woman in Black comes as close as our era can provide. Set on the obligatory English moor on an isolated causeway, the story has as its hero Arthur Kipps, an up-and-coming young solicitor who has come north from London to attend the funeral and settle the affairs of Mrs. Alice Dalbrough of Eel Marsh House. The routine formalities he anticipates give way to a tumble of events and secrets more sinister and terrifying than any nightmare. The rocking chair in the deserted nursery, the eerie sound of a pony and trap, a child's scream in the fog, and most dreadfully, and for Kipps most tragically, the Woman in Black. The Woman in Black is both a brilliant exercise in atmosphere and controlled horror, and a delicious spine-tingler, proof positive that this neglected genre, the ghost story, isn't dead after all. I adore this. If you are looking for something that is, again, very in tune with the Victorian Gothic style, but has slightly more modern language, not too much, but you're not going to be scratching your head as much as some of the more in-depth things that you will get with the Bronte sisters. This is definitely for you. I love this. This is a beautiful ghost story, and it's atmosphere all around. You can really just see the Eel Marsh house in your mind and all of its surroundings so well. It's so descriptive. It's so beautiful. I love that novel. Next up, oh, this one's going to have a little bit of a caveat to it, but we're going to talk about The Ritual by Adam Neville. Now, if you've been on my channel for a while, you know I have a lot of thoughts about this particular book. I am a huge fan of Adam Neville. He is one of those hit or miss authors for me, but this is the book that I feel like defined his career. I'm going to read the back of the book for y'all. When four old university friends set off into the Scandinavian wilderness of the Arctic Circle, they aim to briefly escape the problems of their lives and reconnect with one another. But when Luke, the only man still single and living a precarious existence, finds that he has little left in common with his well-heeled friends, tensions rise. With limited experience between them, the shortcut meant to ease their hike turns into a nightmare scenario that could cost them their lives. Lost, hungry, and surrounded by forest untouched for millennia, Luke figures things couldn't possibly get any worse. But then they stumble across a derelict building. Ancient artifacts decorate the walls, and there are bones scattered upon the dry floors. The residue of old rites and pagan sacrifice for something that still exists in the forest, something responsible for the bestial presence that follows their every step. As the four friends stagger in the direction of salvation, they learn that death doesn't come easy among these ancient times. Alright, so my biggest issue with this novel is very much that the first half is so much more superior to the second half, and the second half is completely tonally different. That being said, The first half of this novel is absolutely remarkably fantastic. I adore the first half of this novel. I think it is very scary, very atmospheric. You really feel trapped in these kind of ancient woods, and that is why it ends, that is why it has made its way to this list. I think when they do find the abandoned building in the woods, it just sets the tone for the entirety of that first half. It really puts you in a place of complete unease the whole time, and it is the environment and the fear of the unknown that makes this part of the novel so scary. And I love it. And there's a scene where they also stumble upon kind of a ruined church. That is a scene that has stuck with me probably more so than them being in the cabin, even though that alone is very much burned into my brain. But the atmosphere of the settings that Adam Neville creates for the first half of this novel, I thought was absolutely impeccable. And I highly, highly, highly recommend this novel. Going into a similar vein, and I just read this book and I do have a full in-depth review on that, we have Felix Blackwell's 2017 breakout novel, Stolen Tongues. Now this is going to skew very similarly into The Ritual, as I feel the first half of this novel is significantly superior to the second half, but I cannot deny how atmospheric the first half of this novel is. Felix Blackwell finds a way to make just a traditional house terrifying in the first chapter, and then continues on to make a cabin in the woods absolutely, utterly terrifying, and then a random faculty housing condo also gut-wrenchingly horrifying within the first half of this book. He's very, very, very good at playing with setting and fear and tension, and I think the first half of this novel scared the crap out of me more than most books I have picked up in the last several years. And it was really just this kind of ill-at-ease feeling, and again, the fear of the unknown within this particular setting that Blackwell had created. Again, all three of those settings do a incredible job of just keeping you on your toes, keeping you on the edge of your seat, your spine tingling the whole time, and it really is primarily just not understanding what is happening in the setting around you and why. I'm going to read the back of the book. A romantic cabin getaway doesn't go exactly as planned. High up on the windswept cliffs of Pale Peak, Faye and Felix celebrate their new engagement. But soon a chorus of ghastly noises erupts from the nearby woods. Screams of animals, the cries of children, and the mad babble of 100 mournful voices. A dark figure looms near the windows in the dead of night, whispering to Faye. As the weather turns deadly, Felix discovers that his terrified fiancée isn't mumbling in her sleep. She's whispering back. Similar to The Ritual, I feel like the second half of the novel really kind of falls off. However, it's not quite as drastic of a tonal shift as the second half of The Ritual, which makes this, in my opinion, a little bit more palatable as an entirety, whereas The Ritual does truly, in my opinion, feel like two completely separate books. But both of these books have amazing atmosphere developed in the first half of their stories that I think warrants them a place on this list. Next up, we have The Lost Village by Camilla Sten. This is actually translated. I believe this was originally written in, I want to say, Swedish? Yes, it was originally written in Swedish. All right. So this book, oh my god, I read this just because I saw a little bit of chatter about it. I had never heard of Camilla Sten before. I read this book, I devoured this book, super pumped with this book, and was hoping I would get more from Camilla Sten in the vein of this novel. I have read her one other novel that, to the best of my knowledge, is the only thing that she's released since. I could be very wrong on that. And it didn't impress me anywhere near as much as The Lost Village did, and that is because this book is so atmospheric. Let's read the inside for that. Documentary filmmaker Alice Lindstedt has been obsessed with the vanishing residents of an old mining town dubbed the Lost Village since she was a little girl. In 1959, her grandmother's entire family disappeared in a mysterious tragedy, and ever since, the unanswered questions surrounding the only two people who were left, a woman stoned to death in the town center and an abandoned newborn, have plagued her. She's gathered a small crew of friends in the remote village to make a film about what really happened. But there is no turning back. Not long after they've set up camp, strange things begin to happen. Equipment is destroyed. People go missing. As doubt breeds fear and their very minds begin to crack, one thing becomes startlingly clear to Alice. They are not alone. They are looking for the truth. But what if it comes and finds them first? Ooh, okay. loved this because this is kind of built on this idea of like a film crew and technology invading a space, especially a space that is kind of trapped in time. It reminds me a little bit of Last Days by Adam Neville, just kind of in this idea of the exploration of trying to understand something that happened before their time. And I love this. This is a slow burn of a novel, but again, the setting really feels like a living, breathing character all around of our leads, and helps to kind of heighten the tensions as well as further the story in a way that I feel like a lot of stories wish they could. I was really, really, really blown away with this. I loved the setting. I had it so ingrained in my brain as I was reading this. I could just really see and feel what was happening around these characters, and I found it eerie, chilling, unsettling, and this was a very, very, very fun, very atmospheric read. All right, next up. I know I also recently just had this on one of my my list, but I feel like this has to come here again because Mexican Gothic is a book that I don't talk about enough, and it's by Silvia Moreno Garcia. I just feel like it's a novel I don't talk about enough. I know a lot of people do, but I do think that it did a lot of what it set out to do by creating a kind of modern Gothic tale. And when I say modern Gothic, I don't mean like a Gothic tale told in modern contemporary times. It is set in the 1950s, so there is this kind of dated aspect to it. But I do feel that what's so great about this particular novel is it does have a modern lens to it and a modern twist on the kind of old school Gothic tale. Especially a tale set in like an isolated manor house. I think it does a really good job of atmosphere. It is a very, 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 very slow burn for the first 2/3 of this novel, and then all of a sudden everything changes drastically and it becomes much more fast-paced and over the top. And I do think that it is atmosphere that really contributes to that switch working. The location of the manor house that this is set in, the big reveal of what is causing all of this like quote unquote like hysteria and like haunting, I think is very interesting. It is very atmosphere derived and therefore creates almost a technicolor lens into this kind of bleak Gothic setting that we have had for the majority of the novel. So I'm going to read the inside flap. After receiving a frantic letter from her newlywed cousin, Noemi Taboada, I think, I always say that wrong, heads to High Place, a distant house in the Mexican countryside, unsure what she will find. Noemi is an unlikely rescuer. She's a glamorous debutante, more suited to cocktail parties than amateur sleuthing. But she's also tough, smart, and not afraid. Not of her cousin's new English husband, a stranger who is both menacing and alluring, not of his father, the ancient patriarch who seems fascinated by Noemi, and not even of the house itself, which begins to invade Noemi's dreams with visions of blood and doom. Noemi's only ally in this inhospitable place is the family's youngest son. But he too may be hiding something dark, for there are many secrets behind the walls of High Place, as Noemi discovers when she begins to unearth stories of violence and madness. Mesmerized by this terrifying yet seductive world, Noemi may soon find it impossible to save her cousin, or even escape this enigmatic house. Again, I just wanted to put this on this list because similar to The Woman in Black, I really do think that this kind of contemporary lens on a Gothic story, this contemporary standing of writing in today's world, but writing a Gothic story in the way that the story is written, really lends itself to the attention to detail and slow build-up that you love, that I love in atmospheric stories, and I think this does a very, very good job. And then the payoff is just absolutely bonkers. And as I said earlier, the atmosphere and slow burn that leads to it really makes the ending a lot more effective than it would have been without that build-up. Okay, next up. This might be a little bit more on the controversial side of atmospheric, but I think it's very, very atmospheric, and it's just wintry and isolation and cold and mysterious. But this is Bone White by Ronald Malfi. This is also an amazing winter horror story. The chilly weather is getting here, so if you want something really cool and fun and set in Alaska, this is probably it. I really enjoy this one. So it says, Paul Gallo saw the report on the news. A mass murderer leading police to his victims' graves in remote Dred's Hand, Alaska. It's the same bit of wilderness where his twin brother went missing a year ago. As the bodies are exhumed, Paul travels to Alaska to get closure and put his grief to rest. But the mystery is only beginning. What Paul finds are superstitious locals who talk of the devil stealing souls, and a line of wooden crosses to keep what's in the woods from coming out. The more he searches for answers, the more he finds himself becoming part of the mystery. This is a fun one. I will say it's one of those novels where, like, the ending I felt like could have been so much stronger, but I was so on board with everything all the way through. It is a mystery. It is sort of I don't want to say like a murder mystery, but it kind of is, but it is very much a mystery. You do get an answer and a payoff at the end. But it is the chilly, small town, Alaska, isolated setting that really stands out for me in this novel. And it is what drives so many characters to do the things they do, act the way they do, have the responses that they have. And I think it is absolutely brilliant in that regard. I think it makes you feel cold and lonely reading this novel. And I really wanted to throw in another kind of winter adjacent story into this list. Stolen Tongues, again, we have that time when they're in the cabin on the mountain, but this one is almost entirely and exclusively set in this remote town of Dread's Hand, Alaska, and I think Ronald Malfi absolutely nails the eeriness of the small town, the isolation of it all, the coldness of it all, and this kind of winter unknown. And I don't want to say too much without giving away, like, what the big mystery is, but the reveal is very much also tied in with the kind of land that is there, and I think he does an incredible job. I think Malfi does an incredible job of putting this story out there in a way where you do feel like that small town is an all-seeing eye that is always looking and always has you looking over your shoulder, and I absolutely loved that about this book. Okay, and last but not least, this is another novel I don't speak about too much, but this is The Boatman's Daughter by Andy Davidson. This book is Southern Gothic atmosphere to a T. Oh my goodness, this book is a beautiful setting. My favorite character in this book is the setting. I'm going to read the back of the book. Alone since her father was killed when she was just a child, Miranda Crabtree has kept her head down and her eyes up, ferrying contraband for a mad preacher and his declining band of followers to make ends meet and to protect an old witch and a secret child from harm. But dark forces, both human and supernatural, are at work in the bayou, conspiring to disrupt the rhythms of Miranda's peculiar and precarious life. When the preacher makes an unthinkable demand, it sets Miranda on a desperate, dangerous path, forcing her to consider what she will sacrifice to keep her loved ones safe. This book borderlines on mythological and dark fantasy. However, it does so through the lens of a Southern Gothic story. So I could see why people would debate whether this is horror or not. It's got a lot of like Russian folklore in it, especially since it is set in kind of like the Louisiana, Arkansas bayou. But it is that bayou that creates... But it is that bayou setting that really sets this book up for success, in which the character of the setting is the most intriguing part for me. There's a lot of creatures. There's, again, a lot of this concept of this fear of the unknown, of trying to unravel the folklore around this bayou setting and figuring out exactly what is going on with the kind of political corruption of the town that our main character is residing in. However, I did think that this book was absolutely beautiful. Even if the story itself, I felt like, wasn't the most terrifying or the most satisfying read. Again, being in the setting with Miranda on these boat journeys through the bayou and seeing these kind of unknown creatures walk amongst the trees, the atmosphere of this was absolutely incredible. It reminded me a lot of The Willows by Algernon Blackwood, to be honest, but again, sprinkling a lot of kind of like Russian and like Slavic folklore in there. But this is definitely a fun one, and again, leans more towards Gothic dark fantasy, but I don't think I would ever label this just as fantasy. There are these elements of horror and unnervingness, and again, the kind of dread that the atmosphere creates around what is happening that puts this, in my opinion, as being warranted as being on this list. Anyways, that is all that I have for you guys today. These are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, I think. 7 novels that I think really nail atmosphere and horror. Let me know in the comments down below what atmospheric horror novels you guys love, which ones I may have missed, which ones I haven't read yet. I love atmospheric horror and would love to hear more from you guys. And as always, I try to post every Monday and Thursday, sometimes on Saturdays. And if you enjoy these videos, please hit the like and subscribe buttons down below, and I will catch you on the next one. Mwah! Bye.